Hello, this video is going to focus on common mistakes made when dividing decimals. As always, we learn from our mistakes. Mistakes are a good thing. They are proof that we are learning and we are trying our best. In this first problem, it says, how long is each side of a square with a perimeter of 85 and 6/10 centimeters? First thing I'm going to do is draw out my square because sometimes it helps visually seeing a square. And as we know, a special characteristic about a square is that all four sides are equal. So that's our hint to tell us how long is each side. Each side needs to be equal, the same measurements. That's telling me I need to divide by 4. A square has 4 equal sides. So what we're going to do here is take 85 and 6/10 and divide this by 4. Now I'm using the standard algorithm, but you can feel free to use whatever method you would like to do your division. If you want to use partial quotients, go for it. It's totally up to you. Now, I always first look at my divisor 4. Is there a decimal point? If there is, I need to eliminate the decimal point before I divide. If there is no decimal, I just continue doing my simple long division. Now you have to recall how to do long division from this fall. What we're going to do first is 4 times 2 gets me close to or exactly to 8. 4 times 2 is 8. I'm going to subtract, and now I bring down 5. 4 times 1 gets me closer exactly to 5. I'm going to subtract, and now I bring down my 6. 4 times 4 is 16. Now, many of you wrote 214. Some of you decided let's multiply by 10 for everything because that's what I was doing in my previous problems. However, in this problem, you don't need to multiply by 10 or 100 or 1,000 because I'm not moving my decimal point at all. All I'm going to do now is make sure I include my decimal in my final answer. So now I'm going to look at my dividend, and my decimal point stayed here, but I didn't do anything with it when I was doing my long division. The last step that you need to do is bring your decimal point, which was right here, up to your quotient. And notice it's completely lined up, your dividend and your quotient, exactly where your decimal point is. Therefore, your answer to this problem is 21 and 4/10. Notice it's very important that you include your decimal point in your answer. Okay, once you start doing your division, that's great, but once you find your quotient, you need to ask yourself, well, is there a decimal point now in my dividend? Where am I including that in my final answer? So your final answer is 21 and 4/10, 21 and 4/10 centimeters, as you can see here, for all the correct options as an answer choice here. Now for this next problem, it says Wyatt had $73.85. He wants to divide this amount evenly between himself and 4 of his friends. How much should each person get? So we hear evenly, divide this amount evenly between people. That's your keywords for division. So I have $73.85, and I saw that many of you chose to divide it by 4. But I notice in the problem here it says between himself and 4 of his friends. So yes, you're dividing by 4 of his friends, but you also need to include Wyatt as well. So you should be dividing by 5 instead of 4. And if you chose to divide by 4, you probably got some crazy answer. But if you chose to divide by 5, you got much closer to the accurate answer. Now, just like the previous problem, we look at my divisor. Is there a decimal? No, there's not. So now I could start dividing. So again, I'm doing long division here. 5 times 1 is 5. Gets me closer exactly to 7. Now I can subtract. I bring down my 3. And notice my steps for long division. If you forgot how to do long division, you need to pay close attention to this part of the video. And feel free to re-watch this at any time if you need, if you're struggling to recall what to do when you're doing division. Now I'm going to bring down my 8. I have 5 times 7 gets me closer exactly to 38. So I have 35. I'll bring this up here. So I had a remainder of 3. And I still have this 5 here. 5 times 7 is 35 with no remainder here. So now 1,477 is not my final answer. Now I need to look at my dividend. Is there a decimal there? If there is, I'm going to bring it right up to my quotient, giving me $14.70 as your answer. Many of you wrote 1,477, but you forgot your decimal point. You did your division correctly, which is awesome. That's the hard part, but now you need to include your decimal point in your final answer. You cannot forget that. Notice again, my first step, look at your divisor. Is there a decimal? If there is, multiply by 10, 100, 1,000 to eliminate it. Now, if there's no decimal, start dividing. Then in your dividend, look to see, do I have a decimal point? Well, then I need to include that in my final answer as well. Now for this problem here, okay, many of you guys were on the right track here. The common mistake here was when you are doing your long division, many of you are doing the correct steps, but if you make one minor mistake, you write one digit incorrectly, the entire answer is wrong. And I see that many of you are very, very close and you're getting the wrong answer because you're one digit off. You have to go back and check your work. This was a very common mistake many of you are making. You're doing a great job with the long division, but you need to go back and check. Now, some of you might be questioning this and wondering, how are we getting a 4-digit number here when there's only 3 digits in my dividend? Well, the first thing we do is always look at my divisor. Is there a decimal? If there is, multiply by 10, 100, 1,000 to get rid of that. I'm going to multiply by 10 here, moving that decimal point one place to the right, leaving me with just the digit 5 as my divisor. But if I change my divisor, I need to also change my dividend. So I'm multiplying by 10 as well here. Notice there's no decimal point, so every whole number has a decimal point at the end. I'm multiplying my dividend by 10 as well, leaving me with 5,860. Now I'm ready to divide. Notice I'm multiplying both parts of my question before I divide. Now I'm ready to divide. And now once I do my long division, again, notice I'm literally doing long division on the side. You need to rewrite these problems so you can solve. 5 times 1 is 5, gets me closer exactly to 8. I'm going to subtract, but notice I still have more digits up here, which is why I'm continuing my long division. 5 times 7 is 35, with a remainder of 1. But I still bring down that 0. 5 times 2 is 10, with no remainder here. And now notice every whole number has a decimal point at my end. But I don't always need to include that because it's unnecessary. That doesn't mean any representation of anything here. So ultimately, all you're doing is bringing that decimal point up as well. But when we see a decimal point at the end of my number, we don't need to include that in my answer. So my answer is simply 1,172 as my answer. And notice there was not really a decimal point between any of these digits here, so I'm not including any of these digits in my answer either. As always, look at your divisor. Is there a decimal point? If there is, you multiply by tens, hundreds, thousands. If you multiply your divisor, you do the same to your dividend. Then do your long division. Notice it's the same steps in every problem here. After you do your long division, look and see, is there a decimal point in my dividend? Do I need to include that in my quotient? If I do, please move that decimal point up. If not, you have your final answer. Now for this one, many of you wrote 10. You're close, but you forgot one step. So many of you most likely, hopefully recognize there's a decimal point in my divisor. So I'm going to multiply by 10 right here, leaving me with 3. Now, if you did 30 divided by 3 and you're like, I got rid of the decimal point in my divisor, I'm done, you're not close, okay? You have one more step you need to do. You also need to now multiply by 10 in your dividend, leaving you with 300. So you're doing 300 divided by 3, which you're going to be left with 100. Not 10, 100. Make sure you finish all the steps, okay? Yes, you need to eliminate your decimal point in your divisor, but don't forget if you're multiplying by 10, you also need to do that to your dividend. Now, this one as well, 16, very similar mistake that this person made. In fact, you multiply by not just 10, because it would leave me at 5/10. I'm going to multiply by 100. If I do that to my divisor, I'm now going to do that to my dividend as well, leaving me now with 8,000. So now I have 8,000 divided by 5. And yes, many of you right away was like, okay, here I am. Let me start my long division, which is fabulous. Now I'm going to bring down my 0. And I see 5 times 6 is 30. And now I'm going to subtract. And now I can't forget these zeros, okay? You still need to include these zeros. Yes, 5 times 0 is 0, but you still need to include these zeros here. Many of you forget those steps when you're doing your division. Do not forget to include those zeros in your quotient. So now notice your answer is 1,600. I have no decimal in my dividend. Well, technically it's at the end of my number, so technically it's over here, but we don't need to include that in my final answer, and my answer simply is 1,600. If you got 16, you're on the right track. You're so close. So please don't give up. Keep going with the steps. Always look at your divisor. If there's a decimal point, move it to the right by multiplying by 10 or 100 or 1,000. If you do that, you do it to your dividend as well. Then you're ready to do your long division. After you complete your problem, look to see, is there a decimal point left here? If there is, I need to include that in my final answer. Now, today you're going to see problems like this. I want to really focus today on making sure you have mastered these concepts. And I'm purposely giving you some simpler problems because I want to make sure you understand the process. Now, first I see I have 1 2/10 divided by 3/10. And notice I'm rewriting this on my paper. Okay, so now I always look at my divisor. Here I see that there's a decimal point. I'm going to multiply by 10, eliminating that decimal point, leaving me with 3 at my divisor. If I multiply by 10 in my divisor, I do the same to my dividend, leaving me with just 12. Now, yes, I can do 12 divided by 3, which is left with 4. 4 is your answer to this problem. Notice I look at my dividend. Was there a decimal point left? Well, technically there is here, so I'm going to move it up here to my final answer. But when we have 4 and then just a decimal point, that's the same as just 4 is your answer. So you're going to see problems like this, but you're also going to see problems like this when you have no decimal in your divisor. So now here we're doing 1 5/10 divided by 3. I always look at my divisor and I don't see a decimal. So I'm going to start dividing. I'm going to go with the division. Now I'm going to start my long division. Look at what I'm doing here. I'm actually doing my long division. So now I see 3 times 5 is 15. But now I get 5 as my final answer, but as always, I need to look at my dividend. Do I see a decimal point? In fact, yes, I do. I see a decimal point right here. So I'm going to bring it right above into my quotient, changing my answer from 5 to now 5/10. Notice I had to take that extra step and look under my dividend and see if there's a decimal point there. If there is, I need to include that in my quotient. Now, these two problems are very similar to what you're going to be completing today. Use this video and go over the common mistakes that were made yesterday and apply those mistakes and hopefully learn from them so you do not make those same mistakes today. Again, you always look at your divisor first. If there's a decimal, eliminate it. Multiply by 10, 100, 1,000. Do that to your dividend as well. If you still, then you can start doing your long division. And if you still have a decimal point in your dividend after you do your long division, then you include that in your quotient. I know this is about a 3-4 step process, but if you follow these steps, you will get the correct answer. Please feel free, if you're struggling at all throughout the day today, refer back to this video and look through these examples, specifically these two examples at the end.